Okay. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jivana.
So nice to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you too.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're live. I think, let's see. It always like a few second delay um, to Facebook. Yeah, okay. So I was hoping you could lead us in a centering practice. Can you start with that? Would you mind? And then
Sure,
we can
of
talk
course,
about you and your work.
absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great. Um, so, whenever I think about centering, I think sometimes it's just very still. But for me and my work, I really like to move a little bit. So, hopefully, that'll feel good for you all too. I'm going to start just by putting my hands in my lap and shaking out my shoulders a little. And then if it feels good to close your eyes, close your eyes. If not, of course, you can keep them open and look at the screen or any one spot that's not moving. And then start to coordinate a little bit of movement with your breath. So maybe just roll your shoulders back and look up as you breathe in. And then round your back and look to your belly as you breathe out. Do that a few times at whatever pace you're breathing. And now the next time I breathe in, I'm gonna roll my shoulders back, but then also bring my arms up and out. I don't think you can see them on the screen, but I'm getting as big as I can and really stretching my fingers out. Whenever I do this, I naturally wiggle my fingers. I don't know why, but get really big. And then get really small. Give yourself a nice tight hug. Do it again. Get as big as you can be. And then breathe out and squeeze yourself into a little ball. Two more times. Breathe in and get big. Breathe out and give yourself a hug. Last one. Inhale and open. Exhale and round. And then the last one, I like to give myself just a little tighter squeeze. Remind myself that I've got this. And then bring your arms up and shake them out on the way down. And then just last moment, bring a hand to your heart, and if it feels good, one to your belly too. And just notice what you can feel. Can you feel your heartbeat? Maybe your belly rising and falling under your hand. Just whatever you can feel in your body, just notice it. Listen to your breath for a moment. And then when you're ready, look up or open your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun. That was great. Um, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your work. I mean, I know some of it, but
Yeah, yeah, of course. So my name's Jennifer Cohen Harper, and I'm the founder of Little Flower Yoga. What we do primarily since about 2006 is share yoga and mindfulness in schools, and directly with kids, but also with educators, with school-based social workers, and other clinical staff. We also have expanded our work, I guess, starting about 7 or 8 years ago, really intentionally to support families, usually in the school context. So, doing a lot of family engagement work in schools. And we, of course, train people to teach yoga and mindfulness to
mhm.
children and adolescents. I also was a founding member of the Yoga Service Council and spent upwards of 10 years with that organization in various roles, and have stepped back from that work in the last several years. But it was a really huge part of shaping what I saw as yoga and how I related to yoga as a field and as a practice and society, and yoga and the intersections, was really shaped by that work with the Yoga Service Council. And
You
then
were the founder, right?
recently, yes, I was. I was a founding member. There were several of us, but I was really involved at the beginning, and then the founder of the Yoga Service Conference, and ran that conference for many, many years.
Okay. So Andrea is saying that I'm echoing. I know we worked on that, but
Oh.
we couldn't figure out a solution. So I'll just won't talk very much.
I'm not sure if it's on my end. I'm gonna turn my volume down just as much as I can, just in case it's coming back through my mic.
Yeah, I can do the same. I think it might be on your end. That's better. But I think there's still a little bit of echo. Hopefully it's not too bothersome for people. Anyway, that's how I met you, is through the Yoga Service Conference when I came there, and that was great to see the work you're doing. It's so that work is so parallel to accessible yoga. So it's been fun, getting to know you and your work, and how you're all addressing the same issues we are. But I think today our topic is really about supporting children during this time. I think, my kids are older than yours, I think, but I just know that it's been traumatic for everyone, like the COVID and the lockdown. And I think I can't even imagine what it's been like for younger kids, actually. I mean, I know for, teenagers kind of have a sense of what life was like before and during, but I don't know if younger kids even understand. What has it been like for your family?
Yeah, so my kids are 3 and 7, and it's been very intense. We're well resourced, like emotionally, and also thankfully, logistically and economically. So my kids have not suffered kind of the worst impacts. Certainly they haven't, our family hasn't had some of the massive economic repercussions. They also haven't had to experience the illness or death of anyone very close to them. Although I have, but they were people who are removed from their lives, so they haven't had that impact. But they're little, right? So the impact of kind of this massive change in their routine and the quick shutdown of school was really, really hard for them to wrap their heads around. And we've had a lot of the same conversations over and over again, because I try to be really truthful with my kids whenever I can be, without overwhelming them, but their ability to digest sort of the enormous nature of this, I have found that we've had conversations that kind of repeat themselves as they process little bits of it, right? And it takes them a long time to kind of digest and then figure out what their questions are. But it's been really emotionally hard. I've seen their anxiety spike and their behavior sort of vary really wildly from this really beautiful sort of nurturing each other as siblings to absolutely exploding at each other. And it's been interesting because for young kids, they've had to figure out, and we've had to figure out with them, how do we create space that feels a little personal? They've had a hard time, and we've all had a hard time figuring out, like many people, how do we be so together, but then also give everybody a little personal time. And for a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old to figure out how to ask for that, how to express that they need that without just being go away from me. It's been interesting. So, and of course now coming back to the fall, my oldest is got a lot of questions about, am I going back to school? What's happening? Really the questions are ramping up as she's aware that normally it would be back to school time.
Hmm. And so they're not going back to school. Are you homeschooling them? Or are you?
Yeah, we're kind of waiting to find out about our district's opt out policy. We did decide, so we're in New York, right? So we're in New York, and it looks like we're going back hybrid. And we did decide that at least for this first semester, we're not going to do that. For a variety of reasons. I have an autoimmune disorder. My oldest daughter has an autoimmune disorder, and there's other reasons as well. But we spent a long time with the pros and the cons, and once we started really making our kind of lists and having serious conversations, it became pretty obvious for us that going back in person wasn't the right choice right now. We're in a funny in between. My husband and I just made that decision this week, and we haven't told our kids yet. So we wanted to wait for the weekend where we had less distractions and can really, sit with them and talk about it as a family and kind of have just more focused time to discuss it. So I don't know how that conversation's quite going to go yet.
Yeah.
And we're waiting to see what our district's option is for opting out but staying enrolled in the public school system.
Hmm.
Um, so far, it looks like, from what we've heard from all the Board of Ed meetings and stuff, it looks like quite a lot of screen time. So we're going to have to make decisions about that and like how to
Yeah.
engage in that too.
Yeah, I was just reading this morning that I think New York City is the only large urban school district that is going back to in-person teaching in the U.S., which surprised me. Yeah.
It surprised me
Um,
too.
yeah.
But it's a unique district. We've got just so many kids, and many districts do, but we have so many kids who are homeless, so many kids who really need school for so many things besides, typical schooling. And I know that's true across the country, but it's very, very present in the New York City school system. And it's been very obvious how many kids are really intensely
Yeah.
suffering without in-person school here.
But I wanted to ask about our topic. Like you already you made an interesting point about how to help young children figure out how to spend time alone or to ask for the time alone.
Mm-hmm.
Is that one of your ideas about how to navigate this time? Like, what else can we give children right
Yeah.
now, or support them with?
Yeah, for us, and I think it's true for a lot of the families that I've worked with, and also just friends, that we're talking about this stuff all the time. Some of the things that have been extremely important. One, I would say, kind of at the top of the list, is just honesty and talking to your kids. And I'm sure that's no surprise to this community, but at the beginning of the situation, like, it's so natural, especially when you have young kids, to have that feeling of like, let's try to protect them and shield them from what's going on. And especially if you think it's going to be a little shorter term, or like it may turn around, it's tempting to just really try to protect our kids. And
Hmm.
I've learned with the kids I worked with, fortunately, even before I got to my own kids, that really just leaves kids to deal with things alone. Right.
Right.
And so for us, we've been really straightforward with our kids. Like, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, this is what we can do about it. What are your questions? And just try to really share information with them, so they feel part of the situation. And so they're not left like wondering and kind of spiraling and spinning, like, what don't I know? What don't I? There's enough that we all don't know, right? They don't need to be like, what is being hidden from me? So that's
But
been
how
really
much do you
important.
tell them? I mean, how much, I don't have young children anymore, so it's hard to remember, but I know that, certain things are not appropriate for certain ages. Like, and you kind of
Yes.
get to know as you're parenting, I think you kind of learn along the way. So it's hard, even now, it's hard for me to think back to like the ages of your kids and remember what would be appropriate necessarily. But is that just the gut instinct? Like, oh, my kid is old enough to understand what's going on? Or,
The first thing I usually recommend people start with, and the way I start with my kids, is actually asking them questions. so that you can gauge what they already are aware of and then kind of use that as a guide, right?
Yeah.
So something changed in their life, right? School was closed,
Hmm.
right? So the first thing I do before I dive into like telling them stuff is ask them, like, what did they tell you at school about why school was closing? And, you know,
Hmm.
have you heard of the coronavirus? What do you think it is? What do you think we can do about it? You know, like I ask them questions and then build from there. And that usually gives me a good gauge of where they're at from an information perspective. I also apply that same sort of way of talking and strategy to the protests that have been happening everywhere and to George Floyd's
Hmm.
murder. You know, especially my 7-year-old, she's like acutely aware, and she's, you know, like many kids, we always joke like, she hears you if you're, you know, on the other side of the block. She hears you.
Right.
And of course, you know, in our whole family, we're energized and engaged and having these conversations. And we were very honest with her about what happened. But it started with questions, right? And then really watching her and trying to stay really present to kind of where her emotional state was at,
Hmm.
and trying to notice if she was getting escalated, things like breaking eye contact a lot, or like pulling back or fidgeting with her body, just trying to stay attuned to their body so that you can say, so that we could say things like, do you want to take a break from this conversation, knowing that like we can come back to it, right? So just watching how they react to small pieces of information and trying not to overload, because I think in my experience kids can handle most of what we would share with them, but not if we give it to them all at once in a way that's overloading, and
Hmm.
not if we don't balance it with sort of the, okay, so what do we do about this, right? Like, what's our role, what's our responsibility, what
Yeah.
can we do, what can't we do? I try to like modulate between, okay, here's a little bit of information and here's our plan, and you're not in it alone. Right?
Uh-huh.
And see how that feels before going on to another bit of information. I find if we just do the information dump and don't stop with the like, what are your questions, and this is our plan, right? And this is how we're going to stay connected,
Hmm.
then it quickly escalates into overload.
Yeah. And actually something I know personally is that it's hard to do that as a parent if you're not taking care of yourself. And I think like all the things that you just said make sense, but all of them demand a lot of us, that we're not overwhelmed and emotional and just needing to dump. Because sometimes I think like when I was a stay-at-home dad, I took care of both my kids full time. And there were times where I couldn't help it. Like I was emotional and they were there. And it's like that's what they experienced. I couldn't always create the right situation for them, like that's reality. They're just present in my
Mm-hmm.
life. And especially now
Yeah.
I mean, luckily when my kids were little, they got to go to school, so I got some space.
Yeah.
Um, that must be
Yeah.
harder now.
It's very hard. And at the same time, I think letting our kids see our full humanity is really a gift to them.
Yeah.
You know, I remember vividly a few years ago, my oldest daughter, she was about 4. Um, Maybe even a little younger, because actually I think it was before my second was born, so she might have been like even 3 or just a little bit like into 4, and she said something like, mommy, why don't you ever cry? And it was really like shocking to me because I cry
Hmm.
all the time. Like I emote, right? But she really didn't see it. And of course she had seen me cry, but it didn't like register to her. But it really was, it was a really good reminder to me of something that I had taught, but then not brought into my parenting
Hmm.
in a strong enough way. Is like, our kids need to see us have all the emotions, as long as we're not putting them in a situation where we're scaring them because we're so disconnected and unregulated that we become a threat, right? And of course that can happen, but it's
Yeah.
important that we catch it and repair it fast, right? We don't want our emotions to scare our kids without context. And it's also really important that our kids don't start to feel like they're responsible for making us happy when we have these big emotions, right? But none of that can happen. Like, we can't teach them that it's okay to have big feelings and that they don't have to be like instantly fixed if we're hiding our big feelings from them. So I've had to remind myself of that a lot, because of course I want to protect my kids. Of course I want them to be happy. Of course I
Yeah.
don't want them to see me like sobbing or scared or, but when I think about what I know, right? Like what I know and what I want for the long term for them, is for them to really like deeply have a felt embodied experience that emotions are safe, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not having emotions in front of them, they're not going to. Right? So what you're speaking to of like having those conversations with your kids requires us to be regulated, that's true. But it's like, pick your moments to have the conversations. And when,
Yeah.
don't try to have the conversation when you're escalated.
Yeah.
When you're escalated in front of your kid, when my emotions are escalating in front of my kid, I'm trying to remind myself, okay, let them see what I'm feeling, but remember to circle back and put it in context as soon as I'm capable of doing that. And just keep an eye on whether it's getting scary. And if it is, then I have to take myself out of the, even if it's
Yeah.
like, I'm just going to step into the bathroom for a minute, right? Like, it's my responsibility if I'm a parent, to the best of my ability, to be aware if my energy and my emotions are actually scaring my kids. Then I try to step back. But if they're not, I try to stay and give them context.
Hmm.
That might not mean the whole story of why I'm upset, right? It's just like, I'm having a really big feeling, but
Yeah.
I'm okay. You're okay. We're okay. And I'm going to talk to you about what's going on in half an hour.
Yeah. I love that. I think that so often doesn't happen. I'm just going to say, like, I just feel like that, again, requires a real level of self-awareness. I mean, to me, it kind of shows the importance of parents having some kind of, like practice to help regulate
Practice.
ourselves, like yoga and meditation, whatever that is, that helps us have self-care so that we can then bring that kind of self-awareness to parenting, that it's where you have that, what you describe, which is such a beautiful balance between honesty and um, and not deceiving our children, but also protecting them. And I feel like that's always a line. Like, what I found about parenting is that it felt like I was always walking this really fine line, and it would, it'd always fall off once I, yeah. But like,
Yes.
it's always these really dangerous challenges, dangerous because it feels like, oh wow, I'm being too emotional, or I'm not sharing enough, or I said too little, or I said too much, and really trying to find
Mm-hmm.
the balance, and also just give ourselves a break, because I know for myself that um, like, my kids are both really having challenges, and my daughter especially, I've shared about before on here. Like, she's 14 and she's in a residential treatment program for drugs and mental health issues, and like, it feels like a failure for me personally, like, oh, I did something wrong. But I just, have to remind myself that that's her, this is also her life that I don't control. Like, I was the best parent I could be. I think I did a good job, but she came into the world with issues. She has her own, whatever, you know whatever you want to call it, karma or genetic makeup or whatever that is, that she's figuring out in the world. So yeah, so forgiving myself is important too, and I think especially during this time, that seems important, for parents, give themselves a break. There's some
Yeah.
comments I just want to share with you. Like, one early comment was, keeping the television turned off can be helpful, and playing music. I thought that was really helpful, Andrea and
Yeah.
Chantel. Thank you. Asking questions of teens. Oh, asking questions to keep the conversation going. And then this person has teens, and they don't want to be told they can and can't do. And that's true. That's a whole nother world. Dealing with teenagers is quite different, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and then Mary, hi Mary, she's recommending a book, Right Now I'm Fine, by Dr. Daniela Owen. I don't know if you know
Mm-hmm.
that book.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for
Anyway,
sharing those comments. I mean, there's a
yeah,
couple of things I'd really like, just threads I'd like love to pull on from what you're saying. One about like self compassion as a parent, and then two about kind of that tightrope thing.
yeah,
And then maybe just speak to a couple of those comments. But I mean, the self compassion piece was like, I think is just life saving as a parent and probably as anybody, but
yeah,
that feeling of being responsible for somebody else's life is that's no joke. I mean, that's just no joke. And that piece of reminding for me, it's like I have to remind myself it is their life, right? Like it is their life, and we can't control it even in the best of circumstances.
no,
And that idea as a parent that we can make their world safe or that we can be like the right parent, it's like we don't know what kids we're going to get. So how there's like a million ways to be a parent, and then a million matchups between like parenting and kid. And
yeah,
you know I think usually all the people I've known who are actually spending the time asking themselves these questions and thinking about how to be a good parent actually already are being a good parent. Right? Because
yeah,
it's like the main thing our kids need is for us to
yeah,
listen and pay attention and attune to them and like not run away from them when they have big feelings. And it's easy to say like in a conversation like this, but like I assure
yeah,
you I am living it. And I've had my daughter screaming in my face, I'm sure like many people, like some version of like you're just ruining everything. And it's interesting because I was fortunate to have many years of practice before I had kids, and I'm always so freaking grateful for it. Like, A, that I had a personal practice for years and that I worked with other people's kids before I had my kids, so that I
mm,
had the opportunity to learn that the person in front of me can have their experience and it doesn't have to become my experience. Right?
mm,
That I can be compassionate, that I could be attuned, that I could
yeah,
be present to my own emotions and someone else's emotions without them becoming the only thing happening inside me. And parenting has required that more than anything else I've ever known. Right? The ability to be in a storm that could easily just become all consuming and
yeah,
just be like, okay, this is the storm. I am not the storm. Right? And like
yeah,
all the things that we learn to work with in our mind and in our body and in our practice. I'm so grateful that I had that context to come into parenting. And when my kids are really struggling, I had a lot of guilt in the past about like if they're struggling, I should be struggling. And even
mm,
we were chatting a little bit and right at the opening, right? And you asked me like, how are you doing? Are you okay? And I said like, well, if my
yeah,
kids are okay, I'm okay. And that's true, but it's also not true. Like they can be having a very bad day and it doesn't have to be my bad day. And
yeah,
and the things that I remind myself of is like the measure of whether I'm a good parent in this moment is not my kid's behavior, right? It's not what my kid is doing, it's what I'm doing, right?
yeah,
Like if I am being aware, if I'm taking in the information that they're giving me and doing my best to make sense of it
yeah,
and meet their needs, like them being happy or unhappy right now
yeah,
doesn't mean I'm being a good or bad parent. Them behaving or misbehaving right now doesn't mean I'm being a good or bad parent. And believe me, I have to give myself this talk like actively in my mind all the time. But it's true, right? It's
yeah. I
really
feel like
true.
you should. I mean, I know you've written many books, so I imagine that message is in there in all of them. But I just wish that all parents could hear that because it's such a like it can mess with your head so much. Like this kind of basing your own self worth on how your kids perform or don't perform, and you know, from how they're behaving versus actually how they end up in the world. I mean, I've really had to work on that because of my daughter's struggles. In fact, it's really helped me. I mean, her situation is so extreme that it really showed me early on because her emotional reaction to things would be just like so extreme that I started to see very early with her that like, okay, wait, this isn't based on what's happening right here. Like she was having this like just extreme emotional ups and downs that seemed unrelated to the situation, which has to do with her. own mind and how she responds to to stimulus, basically. Um, but it helped me actually to see what you just said, and as well as having a long practice, which is that like I'm not attached. Like I'm that's where the non-attachment comes in with our kids. It's like we love them, but we don't have to base our happiness on that, on how they perform. It's almost a little bit, well, it's freeing in a very positive way, and it's a little bit of what's the word? I think more respectful actually of them as separate humans, to not be so attached in that way where it's just like my ego and how and my sense of self is based on their performance.
Yeah. Well, it's also freeing for them, right? What you're saying is
Yeah.
really important. Like it's more, it feels more respectful. And I think that there's like a really important truth there, which is that if as the parent, we are basing our sense of ourself on our kids, anything, mood,
Yeah.
well-being, performance, that puts a huge amount of pressure on them,
Yeah.
right? They know that. So like, how are our kids manipulating themselves
Mm.
to make us okay? No parent wants that, but there's this push pull, right? Of like, how can I
Yeah.
be okay if my kid's not okay? But then if I'm not okay, my kid is stuck worrying about me, when
Yeah.
really I want them to be able to like be
Yeah.
focusing inward. And it's a really tricky thing, but I do feel like sometimes when my kid is like not okay and I'm like, okay, I'm calm, I'm not getting like
Mhm.
drawn into it, there's this kernel of guilt that like I should be more upset about this. But I also have recognized so many times where my ability not to let her situation suck me in so emotionally and so viscerally actually gives her permission to just have whatever storm she's having, whatever situation she's going through. It gives it to her,
Yeah.
right, without her worrying about its impact on me. And I think that's a really important thing for us to do for our kids.
Right. And I guess I would just say that all of this is important because, you know, I think we have to look at what is our actual goal in parenting. Sometimes I think we live in, at least here in the US, there's so much competition, and it's like, is the goal that they perform a certain way, or is the goal for them to have a kind of content life, or a positive sense of self? Like, that's a different goal than like whatever is normally put out as the goal in the West. So I guess I just feel like that's been important to me, in terms of really thinking about how I interact with them, and letting them be free, because I want them to learn how to be independent, and not dependent on me, not controlled by me. Um, anyway, I
Yeah.
hope that made sense.
Oh, it makes a ton of sense. And it's, it's a big challenge as a parent to
Yeah,
embody that for our kids, but then also simultaneously be like, and I love you through whatever it is, right? To
yeah,
like be both, like let go a
yeah,
little. And that's always like the thing with non-attachment, right? Is like, okay, I can be non-attached, but how do I also at the same time make it very clear that like I'm in it for the long haul and the love is not going away? Because
yeah,
I think if we don't have a practice, and if we haven't sort of grappled with these things in ourselves, and at least to some degree made sense of our own past relationship history and our family dynamics growing up, it's really easy to kind of go to one side or the other of that, and not and struggle to send the message that you are both your own person entitled to your own life and your own emotions, and I love you, and I
hmm,
have compassion, and I can attune to your emotional experience, and I understand it, and I care about it, and I validate
yeah,
it, right? All of those things. It's like it's easy to detach, right? It's
yeah,
easy to detach when we say we're not attached. And that's also really problematic, because if our kids think their big emotions make us detach,
mm,
right, then they're right back to trying to control themselves to make us
uh-huh.
happy or to
I see
protect
what
the
you're saying.
relationship, right?
Yeah,
So for me, like that threading that needle and that tightrope that you're talking about is kind of here in this sweet spot of like, anxiety is rising. There's a lot to be afraid of. There are real challenges in the world that are not going away, right? And to be able to send the message with our words, of course, but also with our actions and our body language and our choices, right? To be able to send the message that things are hard, and I believe you have the inner resources to meet life's challenges. I believe you're strong, even if you don't feel strong right now. And you're not in it alone, right? Like to have all those parts, like life is hard. I believe you're up for the challenge, and you're not in it alone, right? I'm right here, right?
Yeah.
That I think is the sweet spot when our kids are in a place of fear or anxiety. It's, I think there's a lot of temptation to distract our kids when they have hard feelings, or to focus on like calming practices, right? Because their nervous systems are escalating, so we want to calm them. But if there's something scary that we're facing, getting calm is really not necessarily how we can best make ourselves feel up to the task of dealing with it. So a lot of times I'll say things like the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's personal power. Right? Like, I don't want my kids to think something's threatening or scary or overwhelming me, and I need to calm myself and kind of shrink and disappear, right? I want them sometimes to say like, okay, I'm getting escalated. I need to calm down enough so I can see this clearly, but then I need to power up, right? And find my own sense of agency and capacity. And where I try to really remind myself when I'm doing that with my kids, where I try to kind of stay and what's a challenge for me now is finding the balance between giving them that message, saying, okay, you've got this personal power, and not leaving them in it alone. Because I think we need to feel connected in order to access our power. Right? And there's so much in our culture, so much emphasis on like grit and resilience as individual personal traits, and I think that can be really frankly damaging and ridiculous. It's a whole nother conversation.
Well,
right? But it's not unimportant. It's just, I think it's a both end, right? Like we need to help our kids feel connected to their personal power, and we also need them to really know that accessing our personal power happens in relationship and in community and in connection, and community starts in the family, right? So that's the dance I'm trying to do with my kids at this age.
I mean, that was so beautiful. I just, again, I don't want to keep bringing it back to parents, but like, I just feel like as a parent, that's exactly what I need to do. Like, I need that message. I know personally I struggle with anxiety, and I love that concept of, the opposite of anxiety isn't that peace or something, but it's actually empowerment. And I feel like that's such a great message for all of us, to hear, not just kids, but and going back to something you said about non-attachment, I just want to say, like, I love the way you phrased it, because I think that detachment is kind of dangerous. And I like to think, to me, non-attachment in the yoga world is actually like a double negative. And so actually, because attachments are kind of, it's not like parenting. I think in the parenting land, attachment's a good thing. In yoga, attachment's not really a good thing. It's dependency, you know what I mean? And that's not really good. So I would just say in yoga world, I like to think of non-attachment as kind of freedom from dependency and freedom from, the need for something outside of yourself. So I think as a parent, like the non-attachment I think of is that you love your kids, but you're not depending on them to make you happy as a parent. Like that's what I'm working toward.
That's so perfectly said. And it's a little trippy for me sometimes, because I work so much with mental health care providers.
Yeah.
So of course, like, if you're familiar with like attachment parenting and healthy attachments and like the clinical language around attachment and attachment disorders is like so present for me. And then the yoga piece and like speaking to non-attachment, it can get really confusing. And I think it's beautiful the way you put it, right? Like you care, but you're not dependent on. And if we think about parenting, like if we make our emotional state dependent on our kids, we're actually making ourselves dependent on them. Like we're doing a very unhealthy role reversal and putting a lot of pressure on them to meet our needs as children, which, there's a difference between coexisting in a family and building respectful relationships, and having kids do what is very natural for kids to do, which is override their own needs to
Mm,
keep themselves safe. And,
right.
no matter how beautiful and loving our families may be, like, we can't kid ourselves. Like, we're the power holders in our families as the adults. Our kids, at a very deep instinctual level, know that their safety depends on our love, right? So if we create, even accidentally, situations where they feel like they have to manipulate themselves or disconnect from their own needs and focus on our needs in order to preserve that relationship, they will, because
Mm,
that's a safety mechanism. That's
right.
that's that's what they're designed to do, right? So those of us who have the sort of the gift of receiving this kind of information and this knowing, while we're still raising our kids, I am so grateful for that, because I can see easily how, if I wasn't in this particular community and this particular type of practice I've had, and had the learnings that I've had, my parenting could have gone a really different way. And
Yeah.
I just am very grateful that I can at least stay aware of my goals. I certainly don't think I'm doing everything perfect. And I make tons of mistakes, and I say things different than I would have wanted. And I think something's going to go one way, and then my kid like slams the door in my face, or, like, of course.
Yeah.
But at least I feel like I have the right goal in mind. And,
Yeah.
when I think about the process of parenting, something that I think gets left off a lot is the idea that not everything has to happen immediately. And we can actually like reflect on situations and then come back to our kids and talk about it and give it another go.
Yeah.
And, I was thinking, when you were talking about kind of balancing on that tightrope of parenting, I was thinking, like, it's very rare that the fall off that tightrope is a fatal one, right? Like, it's very, very rare that we
Yeah.
do something in our parenting that really creates an unrepairable situation, right? And we can make mistakes, we can overshare, we can undershare, we can yell at our kids, we can say something that we're like, ooh, that was a little unduly harsh or overly
Uh-huh.
critical or could have caused shame or blame. And you know
Yeah.
what? We can also go back a minute or an hour or a week or a decade later and
Mm,
say, hey, I've been thinking about this, and it's not the way I want our relationship to be. I think
mm.
I said some things or did some things for reasons that didn't have much to do with you, right?
That's
I'd love to
beautiful.
talk about it if you're okay with that, right? Like, there's very few fatal falls, because
Yeah.
children love, right? And are so willing to
Yeah.
forgive us and give us the benefit of the doubt, even if they're not saying I forgive you, right? They
Yeah.
they want to connect.
That's so
And
beautiful. I love that. I think that like being patient with ourselves and with that relationship too is really, I mean, I definitely working on that with my daughter. I think something I've heard from many of her therapists and the people who run these programs is that um, really the main factor in terms of someone doing well in a child, especially doing well in recovery, who are dealing with really serious trauma in their lives, is just having a loving, at least one loving, supportive parent. And that, it's kind of a cliche that love is the answer, but the support of at least one solid person who, even if you make mistakes, you always are willing to be there, at least working it out with them, shows a commitment. I think that's what they're talking about. Just that you have a committed parent who has a loving presence in some way. I think that's really the key. Like on the most basic level.
yeah, a hundred
Yeah.
percent. And it's the most basic level, but it's also not basic at all. I mean, what we know from our yoga practice, right, is that, well, one of the things that we know is the importance of being able to pay attention to our own internal experience, right, in order to come to know ourselves better and to heal and to make choices for ourselves, instead of the world and other people. And in order to really attune to our own internal experience, we have to feel a base level of safety. And for kids, safety, I mean, for people in general, but especially for kids, safety happens in relationship. So, it's perfectly, it's perfectly reasonable and clear, I think, when we think about um, our personal practice and the yoga practice and the benefits of creating situations where we're attuning to the sensations in our own body and the ideas in our own mind. Like, we know how crucial that is. For kids to access that, they have to be able to depend on the consistency and the, like you said, the commitment of
Yeah.
their primary caregiver, or if that is not possible, like one reliable adult, right? It's
Yeah.
nearly impossible for kids to focus on what's happening inside of them
Yeah.
if their safety depends on them focusing on what's happening outside of them.
Mm. That's beautiful too. So there's a few comments. One, I think, is a comment about what we were talking about, that there's a prerequisite, healthy attachment is a prerequisite to, um, for children who, as an adult, can then develop as an adult with community support as a parent. Oh, I see. So like that, in a way, our maybe our childhoods can actually inform how we parent. I think that's what you're saying. That's a really great point, actually. I think for me as a parent, I'll just say that parenting brought up so much of my childhood stuff, and really made me examine things in a different way, the way I was parented. So for sure, um,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'll give you one more. There's curious to know what would it look like if a child is disconnecting with their own self to preserve their safety. What would they say or do that would signal connection that you mentioned? In other words, how would we know? Thank you.
Yeah. That's a really good question, and it's really tough. So, just to the first comment, then I'll speak to the second one. Um, so much of what comes up as parents has to do with what happened in our childhood, no doubt. One of the books that really helped me reconcile with this was Dan Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because one of the things that I think I've gained from my personal practice is the idea that I can give myself the things as an adult that I most needed as a child,
Uh-huh.
and that
Yeah.
it's actually my responsibility to do that if I'm going to be raising
Mhm.
other children. And I felt that
Mhm.
even before, when I was working with children, before I had my own children, is like
Mhm.
I have to find a way to actually meet my needs. I can't just
Yeah.
know what I wish would have been different. I can't just say, oh, well, this is why, right? I actually can't be the adult that I want to be to the children in my life until I can find a way um, to address the needs that may not have been met. But I do think that as an adult, we can often give ourselves simple things like self compassion,
Mm.
like a pep talk, like a different narrative about who we are, right? Like
Yeah.
we can actually, I think, give our inner child quite a bit of what we might have needed when we were actual children, if we take the time to do it, right? Like, if it doesn't freak us out or overwhelm us so much that we run away from it, if we don't make ourselves
Yeah.
so busy that we don't value it, right? If we're willing to make it a priority and actually spend the time to really
Yeah.
feel the feelings, right? Feel maybe like the grief or the
Yeah.
fear or the sadness, like to feel the things that maybe weren't as safe to feel when we were kids, and think about,
But
like, what can I give myself
yeah.
to heal that part of myself. Sometimes
It
we don't want to do that as adults for a lot of reasons, but also because it feels like indulgent or selfish to spend so much time thinking about ourselves. As a parent, we want to be like kid, 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 but it's a real gift to our kids if we can do that for
Yeah, well,
ourselves.
I was gonna say, like, to me, in a way, that's what my yoga practice is. Like, it's about
Yeah.
not only repairing that relationship I have with myself from when I was a child, but also now. But those two things are not really separate. So, um, so much of what I explore in my personal practice is like, how do I take care of myself? What do I need today? Maybe it's and I think that's why for me, like a yoga practice, it's okay to have a discipline, about it, but I feel like there has to be space for creativity and fun and exploration in order to do what you just described, and that is that personal exploration, which could mean dancing around the room or
Mm-hmm.
crying that day. And so I think that's for me like it's almost like self therapy. I mean, we need therapy too, but it's like my personal practice is actually where I get to be with myself and meet myself.
Yeah.
And I don't hear that described that way very much. I feel like the way we talk about our personal practices is often very in a very strict or disciplined way, and that kind of makes me sad. So I really appreciate that. Um,
Yeah.
and how about that other question about
How would you know?
identifying disconnection in children? What would you say?
I don't think that anyone's gonna much like what I say,
Okay.
but I genuinely believe and have seen in kids that one of the ways we know, and it's tricky to know, but one of the ways we can start to know if our kids are hiding themselves for our benefit or sort of manipulating their emotions to make us okay is if they're like really good and cooperative all the time. Right. I mean, this is like one of the key indicators. Like if a kid is always doing what I say, whether it's a student or my own kid, that's like a little red flag for me. Right.
Mm,
Because every human being has bad days and big needs and overwhelming emotions, and it's uncomfortable and sometimes irritating, but I am always reminding myself with my own children, with my students, that if they're willing to show me the messiest, most human, most
mm,
uncomfortable parts of themselves, that means they feel safe in the relationship.
mm,
And sometimes, if we don't know that, if we haven't thought about this, we haven't learned about it, it can feel really counterintuitive. Like, my kid's okay if they're okay. Not always, right? Our kids adapt to preserve the relationships that keep them safe, right? So
yeah.
one way of saying, like, are they really being their authentic self, is to say, like, are they listening all the time? Do they not cry? Do they not yell? Do they never
Mm,
rage at me? Like, any kid who hasn't felt a little bit of anger and rage in this current situation is probably shoving their feelings pretty deep inside
yeah.
them, right? So keep that in mind. And then on the flip side, right, if there's no moments of sort of like softness and tenderness, if there's only rage, if there's only anger, if there's only like a brick wall, that can also mean that for a wide variety of reasons, and I'm truly not judging the parent here, like there's so many, very many reasons, based in trauma, based in all sorts
Yeah.
of things. But if the only thing is rage in a closed door, that child may also be in a place where they've essentially accepted that they don't have safety in the relationship. And it's actually being vulnerable and connecting is a threat. It's a threat because maybe they've been hurt in relationship before. It's a threat because the feeling of vulnerability is terrifying. It's a threat because it gives them hope, and they don't want that, right? So if you go to either extreme,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you did a terrible job. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
you're a terrible person or a terrible
Yeah.
parent. It means maybe get curious about, what is the dynamic of the relationship here, and does this child feel like either they can't be safe with me fully, or they have to keep me safe, right?
Hmm.
And just ask questions about that of yourself.
And Jill said, adults that heal from trauma can spot signs in children they work with and then model a space of safety within yoga postures. I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's true. I think that speaks to what we talked about earlier, which is, as parents, our job to do our work, and through that process, we can become better parents. It's like we have to be sensitive to ourselves, our own trauma, our own emotions, then we can be sensitive to our kids. Like, you can't really do it if you haven't done the work yourself, I don't think.
No. People ask me all the time how you can teach your own kids yoga. Like people are constantly asking me how to teach.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, just do your practice and let them see it, right? Like you really
Yeah.
can't like, it's really hard, and it
I
doesn't mean
know.
they won't ever ask anything of you, but
Yeah.
it's like, the best thing I think we can do as parents, is practice in front of our kids, right? Let
Yeah.
them see it. Let them know that they can ask questions and like narrate what's going on inside of us. Like I'll say to my kids right out loud from the time they were babies, like, all of this noise is freaking me out and I can't figure out what to say. I'm totally overwhelmed. I love you. I'm not going anywhere, but I'm just going to put my hand on my heart and breathe for a few minutes so that
Uh-huh.
I can get my mind together, and then I will answer your question. Right? And like it just and then just do it, right? And
Hmm.
they might still be screaming next to your head, but it's as long as you've told them, I'm not ignoring you. I am
Yeah.
gathering myself so I can be a good parent to you.
Yeah.
That's I think, a really much more powerful lesson than like, hey, here's this yoga lesson plan and I'm going to do it with you. Right? That's in the parental relationship that usually
Yeah.
falls pretty flat.
Yeah. No, just modeling. I mean, parenting is really modeling,
Yeah.
in general. I used to try to like force my kids to do yoga with me, and it was just ridiculous. And then I finally let go, and just figured they'll do or they won't. And oftentimes I think it kind of skips generations. Like my my grandmother practiced, and that's what inspired me. And my mom didn't really practice, but she came to it later. And I don't know, my kids are their own people. They'll do whatever they want. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
something they have in
and
their experience. If they want, they know it.
yeah.
But it's up to them.
Yeah.
So
And
any
so
last
much of the
thoughts? I don't want to
yoga.
keep you a lot longer. It's almost been an hour. So I
Yeah.
just, do you have anything else you want to share?
Yeah. I think in this particular moment in history when so many things are unpredictable and it's really hard to prepare for anything, I think it's sort of an interesting invitation to remind ourselves and teach our kids like how much we're capable of if we cultivate trust in ourselves. I mean, so much of what we do as teachers, as parents, is like plan and prepare, right? And we feel
Mm.
like we're capable because we've done the work and we've done the preparation. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but in a situation where there's so much unpredictability and things are likely to be changing quickly, I think part of the preparation we need to do is the preparation to actually trust ourselves, to trust that we can stay present and that we can be compassionate and we can use the information that we have to make the best decision in the moment and then change it if we need to. And
Yeah.
I think about teaching my kids to trust themselves a lot way before this happened, and it's
Yeah.
coming up in my mind a lot that like, wow, this is the moment, right? When we can't be successful through planning because we don't know what we're planning for. Like, this is the moment to help my kids trust themselves and trust me and
Yeah.
believe that human beings can adapt.
Yeah.
So I think the best preparation we can do coming into this school year is really like the inner work, right? And we can trust ourselves most when we're meeting our own needs, right? Whether it's like going out for a run, getting in nature, listening to music, doing yoga practice, paying attention to what we eat, getting sleep, like all the basics are really important, but it's not a cop out to like be focusing on those basics. It's saying like,
Mm.
I'm going to have to think on my feet. I'm going to have to respond to unpredictable things. I'm going to have to bring my A game a lot because I can't go on autopilot, right? I
Uh-huh.
can't go on autopilot for this. I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to bring my A game. So I need right now, like the best preparation for that is like the foundation so that I can be well enough to do that. That's
Great.
what I think.
Thank you. And last thing, how can people find you? Um,
Oh, all the normal ways, right? On my website is littlefloweryoga.com. My full name is Jennifer Cohen Harper. So on Instagram, it's just at Jennifer Cohen Harper, and on Facebook, the same. I'm really one thing that I'm really excited about right now. If this conversation is interesting to you. I recently launched an online course, that one that was supposed to be an in-person workshop for parents, but morphed into an online course with the Omega Institute on helping kids navigate anxiety. And that is something that I'm really proud of and really passionate about. So if anybody, has questions about that, I'm happy to
And
be
you
in
have lots
touch.
of books out. I
I
see one
do. I
behind.
do. Oh, and I have a new one coming out in the fall called Thank You Mind. I almost forgot.
Okay.
But I have some adult books, some card decks, and workbooks for kids. A children's book called Thank You Body, Thank You Heart. It's like a bedtime book for kids, a gratitude-based body scan practice. And then in the fall, I think around mid-October or early November, I have another children's book coming out called Thank You Mind, which is really like, I wrote it to try to help kids like cultivate sort of a kinder way to talk to themselves. It's really about using our mind to support ourselves, to be compassionate, to be kind, and to help ourselves better understand our emotions, not for the sake of getting rid of them, but for the sake of understanding them so we can meet our needs.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I need that too.
Thank you. Everything I do for kids is because I need it. That's so true. Like we don't need anything different from what our kids need as adults. Like we really just need all the same stuff. We just have like a little bit more self-regulation capacity, like more manners, like more ability not to yell at people in public sometimes, but I feel like we're a little more regulated, but all the needs are the same.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank
Hopefully.
you so much. Thanks for being here. Great seeing you. Good luck with everything and
Thank
with
you.
school starting. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you. It's really great to see you too. I appreciate the conversation. And so much, I have so much compassion for your journey with your daughter and your journey as a parent. And every interaction that I've ever had with you makes me know 100% that she is so lucky to have you, and there's no way that you haven't been an amazing parent to her.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. From a professional. Thank you. Okay, take care.
It's great to see you.
Bye. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. You too. Talk soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.